The old church wasn't much to look at from the outside, its paint was peeling, the wooden doors creaked, and the cross at the top leaned slightly with age, but to 12-year-old Emily, it was the most beautiful place in the world. Every Sunday, she would slip into the tiny sanctuary and sit in the front row, swinging her legs because they were too short to reach the floor. She loved being close to the piano where she could watch the music rise and fill the room like sunlight. Emily wasn't like most children her age. While her classmates dreamed about new phones, toys, or trips to amusement parks, Emily's dreams were different. She dreamed about her mother's laughter returning. The kind of laugh her mom used to have before sickness weakened her body. She dreamed about her father's shoulders straightening again, instead of bending under the weight of double shifts at the factory. And most of all, she dreamed about singing. For Emily, singing wasn't about attention or applause. It was prayer. It was hope with wings. It was her way of carrying her family's pain to someone bigger, someone she believed was always listening. At home, the walls were thin, and money was even thinner. Her father came home with hands rough and blistered, sometimes too tired to even eat dinner. Her mother's medication sat in neat little rows on the counter, but there was never enough of it. Emily would sit at the edge of her parents' bed, holding her mother's hand, whispering, "Don't worry, Mama, Jesus hears us." So when the pastor announced a community talent night to raise funds for families in need, Emily's heart leaped. It was the perfect chance, not for herself, but for her parents. She could offer the one thing she had: her voice. On the night of the performance, Emily stood backstage clutching the microphone with both hands. The sanctuary was packed with neighbors, classmates, and strangers who had come to watch. The air buzzed with chatter and laughter, but Emily's thoughts were quiet. She whispered a tiny prayer under her breath, "Dear Jesus, let me sing this for Mama and Papa. Let me make them smile again." Her dress wasn't fancy, just a simple white one her mother had sewn years ago, now a little too small but still her favorite. Her shoes were scuffed, her hair tied back with a ribbon that was starting to fray. She didn't look like the shining stars people saw on television. But if you had seen her eyes, wide and full of faith, you'd know she was about to shine brighter than anyone in the room. She peeked through the curtain and spotted her father sitting in the second row, his work uniform still on, his hands folded nervously in his lap. Her mother, pale but smiling, sat beside him, leaning gently against his shoulder for support. Emily's throat tightened. This was why she was here, not for herself, not for applause, but for them. When her name was called, Emily stepped onto the stage. The spotlight caught her small frame, and for a brief moment, she felt the weight of the room pressing in. Hundreds of eyes staring, waiting. But then she looked at her parents again. Her father's tired eyes softened. Her mother raised a trembling hand in encouragement. And suddenly, Emily wasn't afraid. She held the microphone a little tighter, drew in a deep breath, and let her heart settle. This wasn't a performance. This was love. This was prayer. And in that moment, the little girl with nothing to give but her voice prepared to give everything. The sanctuary grew quiet as Emily stood at the center of the stage. For a moment, the silence was so deep you could hear the faint hum of the old speakers and the shuffle of someone shifting in their pew. She adjusted the microphone with both hands, her fingers trembling just slightly. But then the pianist began to play, soft, steady chords that seemed to wrap around her like a blanket of courage. Emily closed her eyes, and when she opened her mouth, the sound that poured out wasn't just singing, it was a prayer set to music. Her voice was pure and fragile, yet carried a strength far beyond her years. It wasn't the voice of a child trying to impress. It was the voice of a soul reaching upward, crying out with love. "Jesus, please hear me." The words floated through the room, echoing against the old wooden walls. People who had been whispering stopped mid-sentence. Children who had been fidgeting stilled. Something about Emily's voice had weight. It demanded stillness. It demanded listening. She sang about hope when everything looked hopeless. She sang about light when the night seemed too dark. But most of all, she sang about her parents, asking God to heal her mother's body, to give her father strength, to restore the laughter that had been missing from their home. And though the audience didn't know the details, they could feel it. Every note carried honesty, every lyric was heavy with truth. It wasn't just music, it was testimony. Emily lifted her head slightly, her voice rising with the melody. Her small frame seemed to glow beneath the stage lights, like the song itself was lifting her higher. Tears welled in her father's eyes as he clutched his wife's hand. He had never heard Emily sing like this before. It was as though all her love, every ounce of her little heart, was being poured into the room. Her mother, pale and weary, pressed a hand to her chest. The words felt like medicine, like a balm on wounds deeper than the doctors could see. For a moment, she forgot the pain in her body and simply listened to her daughter's gift. In the back row, an elderly woman whispered, "That's not just a song, that's a prayer." And heads nodded, because everyone felt it too. Even those who didn't believe in God felt something stirring inside them, something they couldn't explain. Emily's voice swelled as she moved into the chorus. It wasn't loud or polished, but it was powerful in the most unexpected way. Each note carried a plea, each word an offering. Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but she didn't falter. She was singing for something bigger than herself. The sanctuary, once filled with chatter and clapping for other acts, was now drenched in reverent silence. Some people clasped their hands together in prayer, others wiped their eyes quietly. A few even bowed their heads, as though Emily's song had turned the talent show into a sacred service. And Emily, standing barefoot in her scuffed shoes, wearing a dress a little too small, looked like the bravest person in the world. She wasn't chasing applause, she wasn't performing for approval. She was singing to heaven itself, and everyone in that room had the privilege of listening in. As the final lines of the verse approach, Emily's voice softened, trembling with emotion. "Please, heal my mama. Please, give Papa strength." Her hands clutched the microphone tighter as though she were holding on to hope itself. By then, tears weren't just in her parents' eyes, they streamed down faces all across the room. The power of her song wasn't in its technical perfection but in its sincerity. It was the kind of singing that breaks through walls and touches places words alone can't reach. And as she stepped into the chorus once more, her voice soared higher, fuller, like a dove taking flight. No one knew it yet, but this was the moment that would etch itself forever into their hearts. The moment a 12-year-old girl, with nothing but love and faith, turned an ordinary night into something eternal. Emily's voice soared as she reached the chorus again. Her small frame stood firm under the bright stage light, and for a moment it felt as though she had grown taller, her spirit larger than her years. The sanctuary was silent except for her song, every ear tuned, every heart holding its breath. She lifted her head, her eyes glistening as her voice swelled. "Jesus, please hear me." The words floated like a fragile prayer to the heavens, trembling but unbroken. But then, just as she pushed into the next note, something shifted, her voice wavered. A sharp intake of breath escaped her lips, the microphone dipped in her hand as her knees buckled. At first, the audience thought it might be stage fright or nerves, but the look on her face told another story. Her eyes went wide, her small body trembled violently, and then, in a single terrifying instant, she collapsed. The microphone clattered against the wooden stage, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the hushed sanctuary. Gasps erupted. A woman screamed. Chairs scraped as people leapt to their feet. "Emily," her father cried out, his voice breaking as he stumbled from his seat. His work boots pounded against the floor as he rushed forward, his heart slamming in his chest. He had carried heavy loads his whole life, but never had he felt the weight of fear this crushing. Her mother, weak but desperate, tried to stand but nearly fell. A neighbor caught her by the arm, steadying her as tears streamed down her face. "No, no, not my baby," she whispered, clutching her chest as though her heart itself were shattering. On stage, Emily lay motionless, her small hand still curled as if she were holding onto her song. The spotlight, cruelly unwavering, illuminated her fragile body now silent. The pianist froze, his hands hovering helplessly over the keys. Ushers rushed forward, shouting for space. "Move back, give her air." A man from the back row, a retired doctor, pushed through the crowd and dropped to his knees beside Emily. "Check her pulse," he muttered, his voice tight with urgency. He pressed 2 fingers gently to her neck. Nothing. His face tightened. He began chest compressions, his voice firm. "Now." Phones lit up as people dialed emergency numbers with shaking hands. Mothers clutched their children closer. Strangers wept openly, unable to comprehend how a moment of such beauty had turned to tragedy in the blink of an eye. Her father knelt beside her, his rough, blistered hands cradling her tiny fingers. "Come on, baby, please, open your eyes. Daddy's here, please." His voice cracked into a sob, tears falling onto the stage floor. The room, once filled with the sound of Emily's song, was now heavy with cries and prayers. Some people knelt in their pews whispering desperate pleas to God. Others covered their mouths in shock, unable to look away. And then, a chilling hush fell as the doctor leaned back, sweat beading his forehead, his eyes filled with sorrow. He shook his head slowly. "She's gone." The words pierced the air like a dagger. A sound of collective heartbreak rose, a wave of grief that swept through every soul present. Emily's father broke down completely, pulling her small body into his arms, rocking her gently as if he could will life back into her. Her mother's cries echoed through the hall, raw and broken, the kind of cry that could tear heaven open. The sanctuary was no longer just a church or a stage, it was holy ground, where a child's final song had been sung, and where a community now stood shattered, not yet realizing the miracle her voice had already begun to plant in their hearts. The church was still, silent, except for the sound of a father's sobs echoing through the sanctuary. Emily's small body rested in her father's arms, her head against his chest, as if she were simply asleep after a long day. But no warmth came from her anymore, no breath rose and fell, only stillness. The crowd lingered, frozen between disbelief and heartbreak. Some people bowed their heads, whispering prayers through their tears. Others just stared at the little girl who had, only minutes earlier, filled the room with a voice that felt like heaven itself. Emily's mother, frail and trembling, sat in the front pew, her face buried in her hands. Her body shook as sobs tore through her, and though neighbors held her shoulders, nothing could ease the grief breaking her from the inside. Her father, calloused hands wrapped around his daughter's delicate frame, looked upward as tears streamed down his face. His lips trembled. "Why God, she was just a child, she was our angel." His voice cracked, raw with the kind of pain words can hardly carry, but as he looked out into the sea of faces before him, something caught his attention. Strangers wept openly, families held hands tighter, and even those who had never prayed before now had their eyes lifted upward, whispering Emily's name to heaven. Her song had not just reached her parents, it had reached everyone. He thought of the words she had sung, the plea for her mother's healing, the prayer for his strength, the hope that light would come even in darkness. She hadn't been singing for herself, she had been carrying the weight of their family, offering it to Jesus with every note. And somehow, in her final moments, she had carried the weight of an entire community too. The pastor slowly stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the father's shoulder. His voice trembled as he spoke. "She gave us all a gift tonight, she reminded us of faith, of love, of what matters most." Emily's father looked again at the faces in the crowd, people who had come for a simple talent show, now united by grief and love. He realized that Emily, his little girl, had done what he never could. She had broken through walls, stirred hearts, and left behind something eternal. Tears blurred his vision, but in the middle of his pain, a quiet realization dawned. His daughter had never been singing for applause or recognition. She had been singing to God, and God had used her voice to touch everyone in that room. A young boy from Emily's school stepped forward timidly, holding a small crumpled piece of paper. His voice shook as he said, "She gave me this before she went on stage. She told me if I ever felt sad, I should read it." He handed it to Emily's father. With trembling hands he unfolded it. In Emily's crooked handwriting were just 4 words, "Love never fades away." The father pressed the note to his chest, fresh tears spilling from his eyes. He understood now. Emily's body might be gone, but her love, her song, would never fade. It had already planted seeds in the hearts of everyone who had heard it. Around the sanctuary, people began to hold hands, strangers comforting strangers. The room, once filled with cries of despair, slowly filled with quiet prayer and unity. In the shadow of loss, Emily had given them something rare, compassion that bound them together. Her father kissed her forehead one last time and whispered, "You've done more in 12 years than most do in a lifetime. I'll carry your song forever." And in that moment of unspeakable grief, a realization anchored itself in his soul. His daughter's short life had not been wasted. It had been a candle lit in the dark, one that would keep burning in the lives she touched. The church was filled again a week later, but this time, the atmosphere was different. Black ribbons adorned the doors, candles flickered at the altar, and the pews overflowed with people, neighbors, classmates, teachers, even strangers who had only heard about the little girl who sang her final song to Jesus. They hadn't all come to mourn, they had come to honor. Emily's photo rested near the stage, her bright smile captured in a simple frame. Around it, flowers had been laid in bunches, their fragrance mingling with the faint smell of candle wax. It was a bittersweet sight. The stage where she had sung her heart out now stood as a memorial to her courage and love. When the service began, the pastor spoke softly but firmly. Emily's song did not end when her voice fell silent. It lives in each of us. Her prayer that night has already been answered in ways she never imagined, and it was true. In the days following her passing, something remarkable had begun to unfold. The recording of her final performance, captured by a parent in the audience, had spread across the community and beyond. Within hours, people who had never met Emily were weeping as they listened to her fragile, angelic voice. Messages of love and prayers poured in from across the country. Her voice had gone further than she could have ever dreamed. But perhaps the greatest miracle happened closer to home. An anonymous donor, moved by Emily's story, stepped forward to cover the cost of her mother's medical treatments. For the first time in months, her parents no longer had to choose between food and medicine. Her mother's health began to improve, slowly but surely, as if Emily's prayer had found its answer through the kindness of a stranger. Her father, though broken by grief, stood before the congregation with tears shining in his tired eyes. He held up the small crumpled note Emily had once written. "Love never fades away." His voice cracked as he said, "These were my daughter's last words to me, and now I see what she meant. Her love is here. It's in your tears, in your prayers, in the way you've shown up for us. She may not be with us in body, but her love, it hasn't faded. It never will." The crowd listened in silence, many holding back sobs. Emily's song had planted something that was now blossoming into compassion and unity. Her short life had become a reminder that love doesn't need years to grow, it only needs a willing heart. Then the pastor pressed a button on the sound system, and Emily's voice filled the sanctuary once more. The recording of her final performance played, echoing through the speakers, tender and fragile yet powerful beyond words. Her mother clutched her husband's hand as her daughter's voice rose again, "Please heal my mama. Please give Papa strength." Tears ran down her cheeks, but for the first time, she smiled through them. Because even in her absence Emily was still singing for them. Around the room people stood, some closed their eyes in prayer, others lifted their hands in reverence. It was no longer a funeral service, it was a continuation of Emily's concert, her eternal song. By the end of the recording, the sanctuary was alive with hope, hearts were mended, faith was renewed, and strangers left as friends. Emily's voice had done what sermons and speeches often could not. It had reached directly into the soul, and as the candles flickered and the crowd slowly dispersed, her father whispered to the heavens, "Your song lives on, my little girl, forever, because love, once given, never dies." And Emily's love, her prayer, her faith, her music, would echo far beyond that small church, into lives she would never see, reminding the world of a truth too often forgotten: even the smallest voice can leave the loudest echo.